Charlie Bowdre was dead before he hit the snow. The bullet that killed him wasn't meant for him. It had his best friend's name on it. Billy the Kid was standing right there, and Pat Garrett's men fired anyway. Not because they confused the two, but because they didn't care. Anyone in that cabin was dying that morning. Charlie took the shot, dropped his gun, and Billy the Kid did something that shocked every lawman watching from the darkness outside. He pushed Charlie back out the door, not to save him, not to give him a chance. Billy shoved a dying man into the open with one instruction: go kill as many of them as you can before you fall. Charlie Bowdre walked out of that cabin with a hole through his chest and his hands raised. Pat Garrett's posse watched him stumble toward them in the snow, arms up, blood pouring through his coat. One of them yelled, "He's surrendering." Another raised his rifle anyway. Charlie collapsed face first into the snow 6 feet from the men who shot him. He was dead before anyone reached him. Inside the cabin, Billy the Kid was already calculating his next move. He wasn't surrendering. He wasn't panicking. He was 21 years old, trapped in a burning building surrounded by a 12-man posse led by the one man who knew every trick he had, because Billy had taught him most of them. What Billy did next is the reason Pat Garrett never slept easy again. The friendship that built the trap. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid were not enemies who became lawmen and outlaws. They were friends first. That's the part most people skip over, and it's the part that makes everything that followed impossible to understand. They rode together across New Mexico territory for 3 years. They drank in the same saloons, slept under the same sky, shared food when there was food, and went without when there wasn't. Garrett was 10 years older, 30 to Billy's 20, and he understood the territory in ways Billy was still learning. Billy was faster, more reckless, already building a reputation that Garrett admired, or said he did. Billy trusted Garrett the way you trust someone who has seen you at your worst and stayed anyway. That trust had a dollar amount. The territorial governor put $500 on Billy's head in 1880 and needed someone who could actually find him. Not a stranger. Not a hired tracker from back east who didn't know New Mexico's canyons and safe houses and the network of ranchers who sheltered outlaws in exchange for protection. They needed someone who knew where Billy would run. Pat Garrett was elected sheriff of Lincoln County in November 1880. The timing was not a coincidence. The people who backed him made clear what they expected. Garrett took the badge, accepted the commission, and began hunting the man he had called a friend for 3 years. Billy heard about it before Garrett even started. He sent word back, "I know what you're doing. I would have done the same." That's the line that historians argue about. Some say it showed Billy respected Garrett's choice. Others say it was the most chilling thing anyone in New Mexico territory ever wrote, because it meant Billy understood exactly how far this would go, and he was ready. Both of them were right. By December 1880, Billy the Kid had one thing he hadn't expected to have: people who wouldn't leave him. Most of the men he rode with during the Lincoln County War had already gone straight, gone to ground, or gone to their graves. The conflict that had defined Billy's violent rise, a cattle war that killed ranchers, deputies, and anyone caught in the middle, had officially ended. The law had a name for the men still riding with Billy: fugitives. Charlie Bowdre was one of them. 28 years old, married to a woman named Manuela, who begged him every month to walk away from Billy and start over. Charlie was not a natural outlaw. He was a farmer who had made bad choices during the Lincoln County War and couldn't figure out how to unmake them. His name was on wanted posters. Going straight meant going to prison. So he stayed. Tom Folliard was another. 22 years old, pure loyalty, no calculation. He had ridden with Billy so long that separating them would have required surgery. Tom wasn't thinking about survival odds. He was thinking about the next town and the next drink and the man who was his closest friend. There were others: Dave Rudabaugh, Billy Wilson, Tom Pickett, a small group of men who had passed the point where normal life was still available to them. Billy wasn't holding them there. Several times he told them directly, "Go north, go to Texas, go somewhere Garrett can't follow." Some listened. The ones who stayed had nowhere else to go, or thought staying with Billy was safer than running alone. They were wrong about the second part. Pat Garrett was not the fastest gun in New Mexico. He wasn't the most feared. What he was methodical, and he had information that money couldn't buy. He knew Billy's patterns because he had lived them. He knew which ranchers would shelter the gang and which ones were already talking to the law. He knew how Billy thought under pressure. The man didn't run straight. He ran sideways, found the move nobody expected, turn traps into exits. So Garrett built a trap with no sideways exit. He received intelligence in December 1880 that Billy's group had moved to Fort Sumner, a town Billy had connections to deep enough to trust. Friends there, people who wouldn't talk. A woman named Paulita Maxwell, whose brother Pete would later play a role in this story that nobody anticipated. Garrett moved his posse into position quietly. 12 men, armed, waiting. Tom Folliard rode into that ambush first, on December 19, 1880. He took 2 bullets and made it half a mile before he fell off his horse. He died within an hour, calling out for Billy, who wasn't there to hear it. The rest of the gang scattered into the night. Billy wasn't captured, he wasn't killed, but he knew now, with absolute certainty, that Garrett wasn't hunting for a payday. Garrett was hunting to finish it. 4 days later, Garrett tracked them to a rock building at Stinking Springs. A one-room structure with 1 door, no windows, and horses tied outside. He surrounded it before dawn with 12 men and waited. Billy's plan, such as it was, depended on horses. You can surround a building. You cannot surround a man who is already riding hard in the opposite direction. The horses were the exit. Garrett knew this. He had learned from Billy. The plan was to shoot the horses first. No horses, no escape. Then wait them out. The gang had food for maybe a day. 2, if they rationed. The posse could wait a week. Charlie Bowdre came out first, before anyone expected movement. He stepped through the door in the gray pre-dawn light, wearing a hat similar to Billy's, a coat pulled around his shoulders against the cold. He was moving toward the horses. Garrett's men fired. Historical record is clear. Multiple members of the posse later confirmed they believed, or claimed to believe, they were shooting at Billy the Kid. The shape of the man, the hat, the coat. In the darkness before full dawn, it was possible to mistake them. What is not disputed, the bullet that hit Charlie Bowdre was not a warning shot. It went through his chest. Charlie stumbled backward through the doorway. Inside the cabin, Billy caught him. And here is the moment that witnesses recorded, and historians have argued about ever since. Billy the Kid looked at Charlie Bowdre, a man with a bullet through his chest, minutes from death, someone who had ridden with him for years, and made a decision that was either the most ruthless thing anyone in that posse ever witnessed, or the only logical move left. He strapped Charlie's gun belt back on him, told him the wound was fatal, and Garrett's men had done it. Said, "You're done, Charlie, but they don't know that yet. Walk out there and take some of them with you." Charlie Bowdre walked back out the door with his hands up. Garrett's men held their fire. They could see he was hit, moving wrong, stumbling. He reached them and collapsed. His last words, according to multiple witnesses, were, I wish. He never finished the sentence. The men outside spent the next several minutes focused on Charlie Bowdre dying in the snow. Billy spent those minutes doing something else. He pulled the horses' feed bags, which were hanging just inside the door, outside into the opening, trying to drag the animals into the cabin so the posse couldn't shoot them. If he could get even one horse inside, he had a chance. A man on a horse coming out of a door moves faster than 12 men in the snow can react. Garrett's men shot the horses instead. One by one, they killed every horse within reach of the cabin. Billy lost the exit strategy in under 5 minutes. Inside, Billy the Kid, Dave Rudabaugh, Billy Wilson, Tom Pickett, 4 men, 1 door, no windows, surrounded by 12 armed lawmen who weren't going anywhere. The posse built a fire. They had food. They settled in. Billy had nothing to do but wait and think. What he was thinking about, according to everything recorded about his character and behavior, was not surrender. It was the geometry of the situation. The posse needed him alive or dead. Dead meant no trial, no spectacle, no chance of escape. Alive meant transport, jails, guards, moments of transition where things could go wrong for the people transporting him. Billy understood something that most men in his position missed. The most dangerous moment for a prisoner isn't capture, it's the move between places, the wagon ride, the transfer, the moment when the number of guards drops from 12 to 2 because they think the danger is past. He started calculating that move before he surrendered. After more than 20 hours, the gang surrendered. Garrett recorded it as a clean capture. 4 dangerous outlaws brought in without further bloodshed after the death of Bowdre. The governor and the newspapers treated it as a triumph. Garrett was already being positioned as the hero of New Mexico Territory, the man who finally ran Billy the Kid to ground. What nobody wrote about, because nobody fully understood it yet, was the look on Billy's face when he came out of that cabin. Witnesses described him as calm, Not defeated calm, not resigned calm. Calm the way a man is calm when he already knows what he's going to do next and is simply waiting for the right moment to do it. He was 21 years old. He had just watched his best friend die. He was in chains. He was facing 2 murder charges that carried mandatory execution. And he was already gone. Not physically. Physically, he was right there, wrists in irons, surrounded by 12 men with rifles. But mentally, emotionally, strategically, Billy the Kid had already left Stinking Springs. He was somewhere 4 months ahead, in a jail cell in Lincoln, waiting for the guards to make their first mistake. Garrett felt it. He said later, in interviews and in his own account of the events, that capturing Billy was the easiest part. Getting him to the gallows was the part that kept him awake. He was right to lose sleep. They brought Billy to Mesilla for trial in March 1881. The charges were clear, the outcome was never in serious doubt, and Billy knew it. He was convicted of the murder of Sheriff William Brady, a killing from the Lincoln County War 2 years prior that the law had finally caught up to. The sentence, death by hanging, to be carried out in Lincoln on May 13, 1881. Billy had roughly 6 weeks. He was transferred to Lincoln and placed in the county courthouse, which served as the local jail, under guard. The 2 men assigned to watch him were Bob Olinger and James Bell, 2 armed deputies around the clock in a building in the middle of town. Olinger was the problem. He hated Billy with a specific, personal intensity that went beyond professional duty. He had friends who died in the Lincoln County War, and he blamed Billy. He taunted him daily. He loaded his shotgun with buckshot. He had personally loaded each shell with 18 pellets, and told Billy repeatedly that he was looking forward to watching him hang. He said it like a man counting down to something he had been promised. He was so confident that Billy was finished that he stopped treating him like a threat. That was the mistake. Bell was different, younger, less personally invested, doing a job. Billy later said he had nothing against Bell. The record shows Billy was telling the truth, which makes what happened to Bell one of the genuine tragedies in this story. Billy spent his days in chains, reading, talking to the people who came through the courthouse, and watching. He watched the guards' routines. He watched when they were together and when they separated. He watched where they kept things and which deputy carried what. He found what he was looking for on April 28, 1881, 2 weeks before his scheduled execution. What happened in Lincoln on April 28, 1881, is documented in court records, witness statements, newspaper accounts from the following days, and the testimony of people who were standing on the street when it ended. The facts are not in dispute. The sequence is not in dispute. What remains debated is the single detail that makes the whole thing impossible: how Billy got the gun. One theory, supported by several witnesses: Billy slipped one hand out of a loose manacle while Bell was escorting him upstairs to the courthouse armory. He grabbed Bell's pistol from the holster, and when Bell ran, Billy shot him. Bell made it to the outside stairs before he collapsed. The second theory, which Billy himself told people afterward: someone left a gun for him. A friend, a sympathizer, someone who had access to the building and wanted Billy to live. He didn't name the person. He never named them. What happened after Bell went down is not in dispute at all. Olinger was across the street at the hotel, eating lunch with prisoners he had taken outside for a meal. He heard the shot. He stood up from the table. He started walking back across the street. Billy moved to the second-floor window. He had taken Olinger's own shotgun from the armory, the one Olinger had loaded himself with 18 buckshot pellets per shell, the one Olinger had described to Billy in detail, the one Olinger had pointed at Billy's chest while listing the ways a man could die in the next 2 weeks. Olinger looked up from the street. Billy said, "Hello, Bob." He fired both barrels, 18 pellets in each shell. At close range, coming down from above, Olinger was dead before anyone could process what they were seeing. Billy stood at the window for a moment. Witnesses in the street froze. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for a gun. A man was dead in the street, and the most wanted outlaw in New Mexico territory was standing at a second-story window, holding the gun that killed him, and the whole town of Lincoln simply stopped. He threw the broken shotgun down onto Olinger's body, said something. Accounts differ on the exact words, but the meaning was consistent. "You won't need this anymore." Then he broke his remaining leg iron against the windowsill, took a horse from the courthouse yard, and rode out of Lincoln. The whole thing took 18 minutes. Pat Garrett was not in Lincoln on April 28th. He was in White Oaks, handling tax collection business. When the news reached him, it came by rider, and by the time it arrived, Garrett already understood two things. Billy was gone, and Billy's escape had just made him the most famous outlaw in American history. Newspapers from Santa Fe to New York covered the story within days. The details were irresistible. The condemned man, the escaped chains, the guard's own weapon turned against him, the second-floor window, the whole town watching and nobody stopping him. Reporters added their own embellishments, but they barely needed to. The documented facts were already impossible. Garrett took the hunting back up immediately, but he was behind. Billy had friends, routes, and safe houses that even Garrett didn't know about. The territory was large, and the sympathy for Billy, always complicated, always mixed with fear, had spiked after the escape. People who might have talked before weren't talking now. Billy moved. He stayed at ranches where he was known and trusted. He talked to people. He was reportedly relaxed, confident, seen dancing at a party in Fort Sumner less than 2 months after walking out of Lincoln. That confidence, that particular quality of Billy the Kid that made him both magnetic and reckless, was what Garrett was counting on. Billy didn't run far. He didn't run to Texas or Mexico, though either was available. He stayed in the territory, in the places he loved, around the people he trusted. One of those people was Pete Maxwell, whose family owned a large ranch at Fort Sumner, July 14, 1881. 77 days after walking out of Lincoln. Garrett had intelligence, source disputed, possibly Pete Maxwell himself, that Billy was at Fort Sumner. He moved at night with 2 deputies. They went to Pete Maxwell's house, to his bedroom, where Maxwell was already asleep. What happened next depends on whose account you read, and there are several, and they contradict each other in key details. What is agreed upon? Billy the Kid came to Pete Maxwell's room at night. He may have been there to get meat from Maxwell's supply. He may have been there to see someone. He came in the dark, and he encountered 2 men he didn't immediately recognize in the shadows outside, Garrett's deputies, and was startled enough to back into Maxwell's room. Garrett was sitting in the darkness next to Maxwell's bed. When Billy entered, he sensed someone there, said, in Spanish, according to Garrett, "Who is it? Who is it?" Garrett fired twice. The first shot hit Billy in the chest, above the heart. The second missed. Billy the Kid was dead at 21 years old. Garrett sat in the darkness for a long moment before anyone else entered the room. What Garrett never recovered from. The story should have ended there. The outlaw dead, the lawman victorious, the territory safer. That's the version in the official record. But Pat Garrett lived another 27 years after that night, and almost none of those years went well. He collected the bounty, $500, the same amount that had turned him from Billy's friend to Billy's hunter. He wrote a book about the events, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, published in 1882. He expected it to cement his reputation and provide income. It did neither. The book sold poorly. Garrett's reputation in New Mexico became complicated almost immediately. The circumstances of Billy's death, shot in a dark room without warning, unable to draw, struck many people as something other than a fair confrontation. Others said Garrett had no choice, and that looking for a fair ending with Billy the Kid was a fantasy. The debate continues today. Garrett went through multiple failed business ventures, a ranch that didn't prosper, and a political career that never gained traction. He lost the sheriffship of Lincoln County, moved to Texas, came back, was appointed a customs collector. Lost that too. He died in 1908, shot on a road near Las Cruces, under circumstances that were never definitively resolved. No one was ever convicted of his murder. The man who killed Billy the Kid was himself killed by an unknown hand, and nobody was certain enough of what happened to bring charges. The case went cold. Garrett was buried in New Mexico, and his grave went unmarked for years. Manuela Bowdre had begged her husband for years to leave Billy's gang. She saw what was coming. She understood the arithmetic of the situation better than any of the men involved, that riding with Billy the Kid in 1880 New Mexico was not a sustainable choice, that the law was getting organized, that friends could become hunters overnight. Charlie didn't listen. He stayed. He died in the snow at Stinking Springs on a December morning in 1880, shot through the chest, likely mistaken for the man he'd ridden beside for years. Manuela wrote a letter to the territorial governor after Charlie's death requesting compensation or acknowledgement of some kind. The letter is preserved in New Mexico State Archives. In it, she does not excuse what Charlie did. She describes him as a man who made bad choices and paid for them. She received no compensation. She remarried, moved, and lived another 3 decades. She outlasted Billy by nearly 30 years and Garrett by more than 20. She was the one who kept talking about Charlie, not the legend, not the outlaw, but the farmer who got in too deep and couldn't find the way back out. The courthouse in Lincoln, New Mexico still stands. The room where Billy was held, the window from which he shot Bob Ollinger, the stairs where James Bell fell, all of it is preserved as the Lincoln County Heritage Trust, open to visitors today. The shotgun pellets that killed Bob Ollinger were recovered and documented. The broken leg iron was found on the courthouse grounds. Fort Sumner, where Billy died, has a museum and a grave site. The original grave marker was stolen multiple times over the decades. The notoriety of the inscription made it a target, and the current marker sits behind an iron cage bolted to the ground. Pat Garrett's account of the Lincoln escape and the death of Billy the Kid is held at the New Mexico State Records Center and Archives in Santa Fe. His book, flawed and self-serving in places, is still in print. The Stinking Springs location still exists in rural New Mexico, though the rock structure itself is gone. The area is marked. Charlie Bowdre's death is documented in Garrett's official report, in newspaper accounts from December 1880, and in Manuela Bowdre's letter, which names the exact location and the names of the men present. These are not legends. They are records. Billy the Kid killed, by verified historical record, somewhere between 4 and 9 men. The exact number is disputed because some killings were during group ambushes where attribution is unclear. He participated in more. He was present at more. He did all of this between the ages of 15 and 21. Pat Garrett, 10 years older, with legal authority and a full posse, needed 3 months of focused hunting, after being specifically commissioned and elected sheriff with the goal of capturing Billy, to finally corner him at Stinking Springs. And even after the capture, chains, 2 armed guards, and a death sentence, Billy walked out anyway. The 18 minutes it took to go from prisoner to free man is the number historians keep coming back to. 18 minutes from locked in chains to riding out of Lincoln on a stolen horse, with 2 dead guards, using a weapon he took from the man who hated him most. Ollinger had loaded those shells himself. That detail, that Ollinger loaded the weapon that killed him, specifically to intimidate Billy, and that Billy used the man's own ammunition against him, is the detail that people who hear this story repeat afterward. They can't help it. It's too symmetrical to be fiction, and too strange to be anything but true. Pat Garrett pulled the trigger at Fort Sumner because he had to. Because if he didn't, Billy would keep moving, keep escaping, keep turning every trap into an exit. Garrett knew that better than anyone. He had seen it at Stinking Springs, where Billy spent 20 hours in a surrounded cabin and came out still calculating. He had seen it in Lincoln, where 2 weeks from the gallows Billy simply walked out. There was no clean ending available. There was no version where Billy the Kid rode off to a quiet life somewhere and stopped. That wasn't who he was, and everyone who knew him understood it. But here is the question that Pat Garrett never answered publicly. Not in interviews, not in his book, not in the 27 years he had after Fort Sumner to think about it. When you're sitting in a dark room next to a sleeping man, and the person you're waiting for comes in speaking softly, asking who's there, in that moment, before you fire, do you hesitate? Garrett fired twice. The first shot was fatal. The second was unnecessary. He never explained the second shot. Billy the Kid is buried at Fort Sumner, New Mexico, in a grave that has been caged behind iron bars because people kept stealing the marker. The inscription still reads, Pals. 3 graves, side by side. Billy, Tom Folliard, Charlie Bowdre, the 3 men who stayed together until the end. Charlie took the bullet at Stinking Springs. Tom died in the ambush 4 days earlier. Billy lasted 7 more months before the dark room at Fort Sumner. Garrett outlived all of them by decades. He was found dead on a dirt road in 1908, and nobody was ever charged. The man who ended the legend of Billy the Kid was himself ended by an unknown hand, in a manner that was never explained, and the case has never been solved. Some stories don't close cleanly. This is one of them. The window in Lincoln is still there. You can stand in the room where Billy waited with his chains and his plans and his 18-minute exit. You can look out that window at the street below where Ollinger fell. The iron cage around Billy's grave at Fort Sumner gets checked every year to make sure the bolts are still holding. They are, so far.